Let's talk about the major stages of the startup life cycle. So, startups have a very standardized path that they tend to follow. Obviously, some can go left, right, and center, but we're going to talk about, generally speaking, what's the path that I see every startup take. So, step one, ideation. This is, I have the idea. Here's what I want to build. Here's what I'm going to do. Here's all these great big things. The light bulb has gone off day one. Now, let's go to step two. Step two is validation. Now, validation sometimes just takes place in people's heads where they go, oh, obviously this is a problem, and obviously people should invest, and obviously it should be built. And then they're surprised that nobody believes them or cares and whatnot, etc. We're going to talk about validation more later. Let's just talk about validation is not just you. Validation is often an external process where you talk to people. It could be casually, could be formally, could be a bunch of customer interviews, could be just some casual conversations. Depends on how serious you take your validation. I'm going to walk you through later some really comprehensive ways to do validation so you can feel really confident launching and growing and building and doing all these things that you want to do with your business. There's also people that are going to just go, oh, it's obvious and it should be built and let's move on. There's certain little shortcuts that can take place. For example, if you're an industry expert, so you're someone coming from the industry that you're going to build the product in, maybe you need to do a little less validation, but even then it gets a little gray because the validation that you can do can also be pipeline development so that you go talk to people to learn about the problem that you already know really well. You go to them and you go, hey, here's what I'm building. What do you think? What's going on? And all of a sudden they go, oh, this sounds great. Yes, it's been a huge problem in our industry for years. Put me on the list. I'd love to check it out. You do that 20 times. Congrats. You have your first 20 leads. Maybe that's your first 5 to 10 customers. Amazing. After you validate, what happens? You launch. Now, what are you launching? We're going to talk about this more later, but typically you're launching a minimum viable product. You are launching the smallest thing, cheapest, simplest, all the things that you can build that provides value to your customer, that proves that what you're doing is going in the right direction, that it's worth continuing to pursue, both from you, from the customer, meaning like you see that there's value, the customer sees that there's value and has demand, maybe the investors see it. There's a lot of good things that come from launching an MVP and seeing that people want it. From there, as you adjust your MVP, you add some more features, you turn it into something that can actually go to the broader market in that way. You start leaning into the growth phase. So this is traditionally your Series A phase. That's when growth capital starts coming into play. So we've got a product, we've got a customer, we've got an opportunity. Now we need more money to add features, add functionality, add a bunch more customers. Like we are on the come up and we need money to grow. We've launched, we've done the awkward adolescent growing phase of launching. Now we're ready. We're in the young adults, the early 20s phase of let's really hit it and start to grow. Then we get into the scale phase. Now, growing and scaling, they sound very similar, but ultimately growing is getting a few more customers. Scaling is what are we going to do about all these systems and processes and who are we going to hire and at what time are we going to hire them based off of customer use and demand? Like you start getting into like more enterprisey things. This is Series B, Series C, Series D, and of course beyond, depending on your industry, your business. If you're in the fintech world, you could raise $50 million as a Series A. You're in the consumer goods world, maybe you raise $5 million, $10 million as a Series A, or the inverse. You can't really judge how much someone's raising and kind of perfectly correlate it because what if it's a fintech company that also deals with healthcare? It's like, oh God, now they need 10 times as much money. So you have to really be delicate with how you're viewing what someone's raising and where that money's going, whether that's a launch capital, whether that's growth capital, scale capital. Again, there's a lot of different ways to slice this onion. So ultimately, scale is big business. That's when we're thinking about how are we getting big enough to be bought? Bought for, a billion, let's say, bought for 100 million, for 500 million. And then last but not least, step 6, hopefully if you get there, which again, fingers crossed, and that's what we're doing here today to increase those odds, maturity and exit. You're big enough to matter. You're mature enough to matter. Your systems, your processes, your team, the things that make you a good business worth growing, worth pursuing, worth acquiring maybe, they are set in place. And now, whether it's industry people, So other companies that would benefit from buying you. So let's say they have a synergy they can tap. Oh, you have a lot of their customers, they have a lot of yours. They can buy the two, they can do cross sells. Yay, more money. Could be a financial person, such as like a private equity firm or a family office that wants to buy you out for X, Y, and Z strategic reason. A lot of different reasons companies get bought and companies sell, but ultimately, this is that path that we see. First, we ideate, we figure out what we're going to build. Next, we validate to make sure it's worth building. Then we launch it to the people that we validated. So that way we can get that, again, double down on validation and, of course, a successful launch, which means the product's out there and it's being used and it works. Then we go to growth, where we actually go, okay, we're a couple months into launch. Let's really gas this thing up. Could be a couple months, could be 6 months, could be a year, 2 years. Every startup has their journey. Now we're going to hit the growth phase. We're really going to start gassing up customers. Now we're a serious business. Let's hit that scale phase so we can increase how much we can get bought for. And bam, we bring it home with an exit. And Google buys us for $500 million, which should, of course, be a great outcome. So hopefully this path makes sense and you can kind of see the steps in your head, and you'll see how each step is predicated on the last. And the better you do the last step, the better off you're going to be for the next step, because it's a hell of a lot easier to scale something that you grew and launched really well than it is if you really did a poor job on the launch and it's half broken and hard to scale and hard to adjust and hard to service. Really makes that growth capital a lot, at a minimum, you have to spend a lot more fixing things versus just acquiring customers. So take a look at this, think through where you are in your journey. Don't feel like you have to, if you already have a product, you're at the launch stage. Sometimes it's good to double back and go, do I really know what I'm building? Like, could I explain it concisely and well and thoughtfully? Have I validated what I'm building, or am I just really convinced? Remember, just because you validate, it doesn't mean that you don't believe it. It just means that you're doing that step. So again, hopefully this process and these steps give you a little purview into all things in our startup journey.